Hey everyone, we're going to see how to use Gravatar to automatically set a profile picture or avatar inside of your NativeScript Angular application. So what this means is we're going to have a basic login screen, and the whole purpose here is to be able to enter an email address that gets attached to the Gravatar API, and then in return we get whatever avatar is stored for that email address, and it's presented within the application. Now, to add some more pizzazz or flair or whatever you want to call it to fancy up your application, we're also going to add an animation as well. And these two things can add a significant amount of improvement to your mobile application and make it that much more memorable for your user versus rather having just a plain two text fields and a basic login. Having an animated avatar image definitely goes a long way. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project on our desktop using our terminal. So we're going to say TNS create Gravatar project. And since this is an Angular project, we're going to use --ng. With the project created, now we can go ahead and navigate into it. And we want to add our build platform. So I'm going to add iOS and Android. If you're using a Mac, you can use iOS. If you're using Windows or Linux, well, you have to stick with just Android. That's an Apple thing. So we're going to say TNS platform add iOS and TNS platform add Android. All right, so with our two build platforms added, we need to add a special library because Gravatar, it doesn't just accept email addresses. You have to use an MD5 hashed email address. And by default, JavaScript doesn't have any MD5 libraries baked in. So what we're going to do is we're going to download one by the developer called Blue Imp, which is a very popular one. So we're going to say npm install Blue Imp -md5 save, and that'll save it to our package.json file. So we do have our project created and ready to go. So at this point, we can actually start developing the application. So let's go ahead and open up the project using a text editor. I'm going to be using Atom by GitHub. And we're going to start by spending our time inside of the app and then the app component.ts file. So that's a TypeScript file. Let's go ahead and wipe out what exists in it as far as the app component class. And we need to go ahead and add another import. So this is a JavaScript import, the MD5 hashing library that we just downloaded. I didn't download the TypeScript type definitions. You could if you wanted to, but because this library is so basic, it doesn't really need that. So we're going to say var md5 equals require, and we're going to say blue imp md5. And now we can start using it within our application. So inside of our app component class, what we want to do is we want to add two public variables. So we're going to say public picture, and that's going to be of type string. And we're going to say public, and we're going to say email, and that's going to be of type string. So the picture is going to hold a URL to our Gravatar image. The email is going to hold an email address that's not been hashed yet using MD5. That email address will be bound to a form on the screen. So now what we want to do is we want to add a constructor. So we're going to say public, we're going to say constructor, and we're going to define our two variables. So we're going to say this.email equals empty string, and we're going to say this.picture equals. Now this is something I can never remember. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a quick search real fast. We're going to say Gravatar hash. So inside of here they give you, whoops, let's go to the second one. Images. So inside of here they give us the opportunity to use the default Gravatar image, which is all zeros, and you can see that I don't remember how many zeros that is. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. It's going to give us this Gravatar image right here. So going back into our code, I'm going to paste it in. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to say $s equals 150. So that's the size. So by default, it's very small. We want a higher resolution one. Just taking consideration that the larger the image, the more bandwidth it's going to take from your device. But this is just an example. You can play around with it as you please. So let's go ahead and save it. The next thing we want to do is we want to create another method. So this method is going to be the following. So we're going to say public get picture. No, it might make sense if we say get profile picture. And inside of this, we're going to say email, and it's going to be, we'll just say it's of type any, even though we know it's going to be a string. Let's go ahead and name it a string anyways, just to be consistent. So in here, what we want to do is this is going to get called every time we enter a character into our form. We want to check to make sure that it's a valid email address before we try to send it to Gravatar, because if we try to send every character to Gravatar, that's a lot of requests against that API. It's going to be very slow. It's going to eat up a lot of data. It's something that we do not want. So again, we're going to go ahead and create another function before we get started with get profile picture. We're going to call this private because we're only ever going to use it within our TypeScript file. We're going to say validate email. We're going to say email string. And this is where I'm actually going to copy and paste from a Stack Overflow post, because we're going to be using regex. This is not regex that I've created. This is regex that somebody else has created, and they did it very well. It's very long. So, and I'm of course not a regex expert, so we're going to borrow somebody else's for now. So we're going to go to the web browser, and we're going to go to the following. So this is a regex post on Stack Overflow. I'll include the link in the write-up in case you do want it for yourself. But we're going to copy it. We're going to paste it into our function here. Instead of var, I'm going to say let. And what it's going to do is it's going to return true or false depending on if the email address is valid or not. And you can see this is a very long regular expression. Again, I'm not very good at regular expressions, but we do have the convenience of the internet and other people's resourcefulness to help us out. So let's go ahead and save it. The next thing that we want to do is we want to now validate our get profile picture function. So we're going to say if this.validate email, we're going to pass in an email. So whatever we have inside of get profile picture, whatever was passed, if that's true, what we can do is we can say this.profile, this.picture equals, we can say HTTPS. We're going to essentially say this. So I'm going to copy it, the first part of it. There is a slash in there, which is fine, which is good. We're going to say plus MD5 email. So we're going to hash that email address plus, and we're going to say question mark. We're going to say S equals 150 and close it off. So it's now good to go at this point. All right, so we have this very basic TypeScript file. It basically just says, hey, start us off with this Gravatar placeholder image. If we have an email address, give us that new image instead. It's not the fanciest. Before we start fancying it up, what we do want to do is we want to enable user input and data binding through forms, which is not enabled by default with Angular. So what we can do is we can go to our app.module.ts file, and we can import the following. So we're going to say import NativeScript forms module from NativeScript Angular/forms. And then we can import it into the import section. So we can say NativeScript forms module. So now we actually have the data binding that works. So let's go ahead and worry about our animations now. So going back into our app component.ts file, we can do the following. Or you know what, let's actually create our UI first and see where we stand as of now. And then we can add more fanciness as we go along. So let's go into our app component.html file. What we can do is we can wipe this out. We do want to add an action bar. We can say title equals NativeScript, and we'll say Gravatar. And we're going to create a grid layout. So this grid layout is going to have two sections, two rows actually, and it'll be spaced equally. So grid layout rows equal, and we'll say asterisk, so wildcard. So this is 2 evenly spaced rows that'll take the full screen. We're going to have columns. This is going to be 1 column, and it will stretch the full screen as well. The next thing we want to do is we want to add that first row. The first row is going to be an image. That image is going to have a source, and notice the square brackets. It's going to be bound to that picture variable that we defined in our TypeScript file. The next thing we want to do is we want to define a height for that image. It's going to be 75 pixels, well, 75. NativeScript doesn't really do pixels, but remember we did 150, so we're going to see where that comes into play soon. So we're going to say width equals 75 as well. Keep it proportional, and it's going to be a rounded image. So it's going to have a class. This uses NativeScript theme. It's going to say image rounded. It's going to be on row 0, so the first row, and the column is going to be column 0, which is the only column. Perfect. The next thing we want to do is we want to add our second row. So this is going to be our input forms. So what we can do is we can do the following. We can say stack layout class equals form, row equals 1, column equals 0. So again, only 1 column in there. So according to the NativeScript UI theming documentation, now we have another stack layout. This stack layout will have a class called input field. And it's going to have a label and a text field. So the label is going to have a class called, of course, label. The text is going to say email. And we can add a colon in there too. The text field, so the input, is going to have a class. It's going to be input and then input border. So it's going to have a border around the input field. And this is all part of NativeScript theme. It's going to be bound using ngModel to that email field that we created inside of our TypeScript file. And then we're also going to have a change event. So we're going to have ngModel change. So every time a character changes within this field, we're going to call this function get profile picture, and we're going to pass in the event, which is actually the current text. Because this is an email address, we don't want any kind of capitalization, so we're going to say auto capitalization type equals none, and then we can close it off. So we do have it created at this point. We will, even though we won't be using it, we'll create another input field. So what I'll do is I'll just copy and paste this input field stack layout. And we're just going to change from label, it's going to say email, it's going to be password. We're not going to have any kind of change events. We're not going to have any kind of auto capitalization, no ngModel. It's not really going to do anything. But what we will is we'll say secure equals true. So it's going to be a password field. So let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like inside of our simulator as of right now. So we're going to say TNS emulate iOS. So you can see our application is open now. It has our Gravatar image. It's centered vertically in the first row, and then we have our email and password form. So if I click on the form element, and let's go ahead and enter an email address, let's just type in anything. It doesn't do anything. So it has to detect that that's an actual email address. So let's go ahead and type in a valid email address. What we can say is we can just ripping this one off the internet here because I don't want to personally share my own. But this one is dentedreality.com.au. And you can see that it switched to this profile picture. And if I wanted to, I can just erase this character, and it now went back to the Gravatar image. So it changes on the fly. It's very quick. But we want to fancy it up a bit. So for example, this form, it could look better. Also, we want to have an animation in there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the following. Let's first start by fancying up our form. And we can actually do that. What we want to do is we want to stop our terminal. And let's say TNS live sync iOS --watch -- emulator. And now it's going to live sync our changes. It'll be much quicker this way. And we can actually see them on the fly when we start making changes. So what we want to do is we want to go to our app.css file. And we can scrap this button code. We want to actually replace it with the following. So we want to say .form .input border. And we're going to say padding is 5. Background color is going to be F0, F0, F0. So a very light gray or a silver. And save it. Going back to our terminal here, or our simulator. Actually messed up here. So it's not input border. What we want is input field. So .form .input field .input and save it. And you can see now they became wider, and now they have a gray background. So it looks a little better. We can make it better by start adding an animation. So going back into our TypeScript code, we're going to use Angular animations here. So we can say the following. We can say we want to import component. We want to import trigger. We want to import state, transition, animate, style, and keyframes. So this is all part of Angular animation. Inside of the @component block, underneath template URL, we want to say animation, and this is going to be an array. And animation is plural. And we can add our animation. So we can say trigger. We're going to call our trigger, we're going to call it state. It could be really called whatever you want. Let's call it pulse. Give it some unique name. This is going to have an array of possibilities. So inside of our array, the first possibility is we want to have a transition. So transition. We want to transition from the void state, and we want to transition into any other state. So when the component renders onto the screen, it goes from void to not being void. So in this scenario, what we want to do is we want to add some kind of event to happen. So we can say animate. The animate is going to be 200 milliseconds in length, and it's going to be style, and it's going to be transform, scale, and it's going to be 200% in both the X and the Y. And add a comma there. And save it. So if we look at it, nothing happened as of now because we don't have it attached to any component. But that's fine. So let's go ahead and attach it to our component. So what we want to do is we want to go to our HTML file, appcomponent.html. We want to go to our picture component, and we want to add the following. We want to add @pulse, because that's what we named it, equals, and we can say, and we didn't define these variables, but we can say current state, and then we can say active. This is a ternary operation actually, and then inactive. So if it's true, if current state is true, because we're going to assume it's a Boolean, then in reality it's going to be active. Otherwise it's going to be inactive. So let's go ahead and save it and add those. So inside of our TS file, let's go ahead and say public current state Boolean. Let's go ahead and set it inside of our constructor. This dot current state equals false. And let's save it and see if anything happens for us. Nothing happened for us yet. Oh, so it actually did work. So it was just slow. So let's go ahead and try it again. I'll exit out of this application, and we won't exit it. We'll just add something else and we'll save it. So inside of the get profile picture, when the picture does change, what we want to do is we want to update that state again. So what we can do is the following. We can say above here, this dot current state equals this dot current state. So we're kind of toggling it. It doesn't really matter. We're going to save it, open up our simulator here. It's going to refresh, and you can see that it kind of expanded as we opened, which is what it was supposed to do. I don't know why it took so long the first time. Maybe there was some kind of connection issue on my computer. For whatever reason, that's fine. We got over it. Let's go ahead and add a second animation. This animation is going to be what happens when we actually get a correct email address. So inside of the transition, we're going to add another transition. We're going to say transition. We're going to transition from any state, so a wildcard, to any other state. So this is not the void scenario. This is another scenario. And inside of here, what we're going to say is we're going to say animate. Let's do a 500 millisecond animation. This time we're going to use keyframes. So keyframe animation, similar to how you do it in CSS. Add some commas there. And what we're going to do is we're going to say style. So this is the first state. We're going to say transform, scale, 200%. The next one, the next step in our animation cycle, we're going to transform to 0%. So we're going to hide that image. This is all over the span of 500 milliseconds. And then finally, we're going to bring it back up to 200%. So this is a pulse-like animation. So let's go ahead and save it. So we just brought up our simulator. We can start by trying to type in a false email address. So we're going to say test@test. And then it'll recognize it. You see how it kind of pulsated there? That's exactly what it should do. However, we of course want to enter a real email address. So let's go ahead and say BEU@dentedreality.com. Still not correct. It's a correct email address. It's just not found in Gravatar.au. So it did animate. It switched to a Gravatar image, which is exactly what we wanted. So just to recap here, we created a very basic 2-row grid layout, one with a Gravatar placeholder. We created a form, which we styled with CSS and the NativeScript theme. But more importantly here, we added 2 Angular animations. We added a way to kind of monitor for changes in this email form. And as correct email addresses are entered, we use the Gravatar API and swap out those images. So this adds a lot of flair or fanciness to your application. It's much better than just having an email and a password field. It's always nice to add a little bit extra to make your app look just that much better.